Hey, what's up, Twisters? Nick here, and today we're going to reflect on my love-hate relationship with all 32 NHL teams. So really, this is a retrospective about my whole evolution as an NHL fan. So there are definitely teams that I have cheered for in the past that I don't now, and there are teams that I used to hate that I actually like now. So I'm curious to know in the comments below, is there a team that you used to not support that you actually get on board with now? Or did you find yourself cheering for a rival when you were younger and now you absolutely hate their guts? So let me know down in the comments below. Let's just have some fun with this one. You guys know I'm a San Jose Sharks fan, so of course, there are going to be teams that I just flat out don't cheer for, but don't worry, I won't ream your favorite team too hard or anything like that. And if you're new here, you like all things hockey analysis, history, and culture, definitely hit the red subscribe button down below and join our growing hockey community. So I have our list of 32 teams. This is entirely randomized, so we're going to get started with the Ottawa Senators. The Sens were actually a team that I liked fairly early on. I liked the whole kind of like Centurion sort of vibe of that team, the look of them. And then they had that great roster in kind of the early aughts where you had, Daniel Alfredsson, Danny Heatley, Jason Spezza, Zdeno Chara, the best name in hockey of all time, Radek Bonk. Yeah, so anyway, I had like NHL 2K5 back in the day, and so I would frequently play as the Ottawa Senators because that team was just absolutely stacked with firepower. Patrick Lalime had a couple of really good years there too, so I actually liked the Senators quite a bit. Then, of course, things took a turn for the worse about 5 years ago with the franchise. Just the way that Eugene Melnyk was handling that situation at the time. And of course, rest in peace. That definitely turned off a lot of hockey fans to the Ottawa Senators, but I felt bad for the actual fans themselves. But now, obviously, they've got a lot of promising young talent, so that's a team that I've said before, I expect to eventually kind of start following them a little bit more, but it's going to take a little bit longer until they're actually, a contender out there. But yeah, they were kind of one of the early teams that I found myself liking. The next team here is the Winnipeg Jets, and I've been kind of indifferent about the Jets. Maybe about 4 years ago, I was kind of into them in terms of like choosing a Canadian team. I said, okay, maybe it's the Winnipeg Jets for me. One thing about the Jets is that I never liked Dustin Byfuglien because he's just, a huge body out there and would lay some big hits. Did some dirty stuff out there, but I kind of miss him actually over the last couple of seasons. I hope that one day they do win. A lot of these teams, that's what I'll say. But I've never been super attached to them. Now we've got the Edmonton Oilers, and this is going to be kind of interesting. I don't really have a reason to hate the Edmonton Oilers, but I've never liked the Oilers. It really started in 2006. They were an 8th seed that year, and as a lot of you know, they were a Game 7 away from winning the Stanley Cup final. So in the second round, they're going up against the San Jose Sharks. They're down 1-0 in the series. It's Game 2. I'm actually in the building for that one. And at center ice, Rafi Torres, a lot of you might remember him, at center ice, elbows Milan Mihalik intentionally in the head. And there's no penalty. There's no review by the DOPS, I don't think. And so that just made me kind of an Oilers hater for quite some time. Of course, the Carolina Hurricanes would win that Stanley Cup Game 7. It took a number of years for me to kind of be over that, I guess. And back then, they also had those like navy and copper jerseys, which I didn't care for. But yeah, of course, they have the most talented players in hockey. McDavid and Draisaitl, you could argue as well. So I do actually like watching them in some way, shape, and form. But in terms of kind of the hierarchy of teams, they're not anywhere near the top. I realized that I have 4 Canadian teams in a row here. So we got the Toronto Maple Leafs. I liked the Maple Leafs early on. I love, royal blue and those jerseys. I was certainly a fan of that early on. So in 2008, I was actually in Denmark for a semester abroad, and I discovered Steve Dangle's channel back then. That was only his second year of Leaf fan reactions. I kind of got into the Maple Leafs. I actually bought a Maple Leafs jersey back then. I went, another decade until I actually started collecting jerseys, but I absolutely loved their look. And then when they had Patrick Marleau on their team, I was certainly rooting for them pretty hardcore as kind of my second favorite team. But the thing with the Leafs is that, as you all know, the media really obsesses over them quite a bit. So that's really kind of turned me off in terms of being a fan of the team. But that's the only reason why I don't really care for them so much. But again, I do want to see them win one day. If you remove sort of the media, Hockey Central at noon, you'd have like 30 minutes of Leaf coverage in like a 60-hour or 60-minute segment. You remove that and everything is hunky-dory with me, but I don't really exactly cheer for them as much anymore. Now we get to a really interesting one here, and that is the Pittsburgh Penguins. So a lot of you out there are Penguins fans, and I'm very thankful that you're here on the channel and you've been bearing with me despite me flashing back to 2016. I have like shell shock from that. But let's take it a step back. So 2008, right? They go up against the Detroit Red Wings, who I'll talk about later on. Long story short, I'm rooting for the Penguins. They lose, but they get revenge the next year. Marc-Andre Fleury, diving across to make that save in Game 7 at the end. So I was very thankful of the Penguins. But something happened the next year. I immediately became a Penguins hater. And that was because of something that didn't happen in the NHL. You guys know what this is. The Golden Goal by Sidney Crosby in the gold medal game of the 2010 Winter Olympics. I just became an absolute Sidney Crosby hater, and I was for a number of years there. Then 2016 happens. They raise the cup in San Jose. Certainly, we're the better team that series, without question. I'll never dispute that. But seeing Crosby win the Conn Smythe really pissed me off because he wasn't anywhere near the top point getter there. Logan Couture outscored everybody by a country mile. He should have gotten the Conn Smythe, or Phil Kessel if you want to choose someone from the winning team, or even Chris Letang. So that just really got my blood boiling. But over the past couple of years, being on YouTube has kind of alleviated that hatred, that animosity. And so now I'm actually like, okay, I'm not going to root for the Penguins, but I'm not going to hate on them so much. And I can say that about most teams in the Eastern Conference nowadays. Interestingly enough, the next team is the Washington Capitals. So this is kind of interesting. It's a reversal. So initially, I didn't like the Washington Capitals. A lot of people love those classic 90s jerseys of theirs. I didn't like them at all. I think the colors are really weird. They went up against the Red Wings in the 97 Stanley Cup. And I was actually going for the Red Wings back then. I'll talk about that later, of course. But yeah, I just didn't like the Capitals. I was like, what the hell kind of mascot is a Capital? So anyway, then Ovechkin comes along. And because he's like showboating when he scores goals, I was kind of a traditionalist at first. I used to hate when guys would celebrate like that. So that's why I actually liked Crosby more than Ovechkin. And then, we get around to about 2015 or so. And things kind of changed for me. I'm like, you know what, Ovechkin, he's really exciting to watch. I guess I can kind of like him. So then in 2018, of course, they're playing the Vegas Golden Knights in the Stanley Cup, and I'm rooting hardcore for Ovechkin and for the Capitals for obvious reasons. And plus, by then they had TJ Oshie and Yevgeny Kuznetsov, a couple of my favorite players, not on my favorite team. So then I found myself rooting for Washington. So I've kind of been a Washington supporter for the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years. I obviously want to see other teams win a cup that have a longer drought than the Capitals. I want to see Ovechkin get one more, though. Now we go on to the Anaheim Ducks, or as we used to call them, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. So when I was a kid, the Mighty Ducks came out when I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old. So I instantly liked the Mighty Ducks. They weren't my favorite team, but I was like, yeah, they could kind of be my second favorite team. I didn't really follow them all that much, but in 2003, they played the Minnesota Wild, actually the next team here. Long story short, I wasn't cheering for the Mighty Ducks. Then we get to 2006, and the team rebrands as the Anaheim Ducks. And I'm like, why the hell did they depart from this Mighty Ducks look, this classic, iconic 90s look, for something that is just so drab and uninspiring? That year, they also get Chris Pronger, who the previous year played for the Edmonton Oilers, who I was booing against quite a bit. And so I instantly did not like the Ducks. This was not the Mighty Ducks team that I grew up with. And so I became a Ducks hater. And being from Northern California, or basically there, you have a loathing for Southern California teams for the most part. San Diego kind of gets a pass. So I didn't like the Ducks. And there was a decade there where they kind of jockeyed with the Kings for the most hated team in my camp here. Anyway, I don't care for them right now, but I don't hate them like I used to because they're nowhere near the finals. And they don't have Corey Perry anymore, too. Like Corey Perry, you ask a Sharks fan, who's the most hated player, rival, and it's Corey Perry. It has to be. Now we get to the Minnesota Wild, and as a lot of you know, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, so I have a soft spot for Minnesota sports. I grew up a Twins fan as well. So when the Wild came into the NHL, I was like, boom, there's my second favorite team. In 2003, they go on a fantastic run to get to the conference final, and then they get swept by the Mighty Ducks. And so that really ground my gears. But anyway, I wanted to call myself kind of a Wild supporter ever since then. But the problem is that some of you know out there, the type of hockey they would play was so boring. They never had that like elite superstar until last year when Kaprizov came onto the team. And so that kind of reinvigorated my appreciation for the Minnesota Wild. And especially when they rebranded, or not rebranded, well, kind of. When they transitioned from that Reebok look to their Adidas look with those beautiful green home jerseys, I was like, okay, definitely one of my favorite teams in the NHL. Next up are the Chicago Blackhawks, and as a kid, I didn't really care about the Blackhawks, and I didn't hate them for any reason. 2008 comes along, and I'm watching a game. I had been to Chicago before, and I used to have a lot of fun going over there. So I'm watching a game on TV, and Chelsea Dagger comes on. I'd never heard the song, and I was like, damn, dude, like, that's catchy. I like that quite a bit. So I started liking the Blackhawks. Wayne's World is one of my favorite films, and so, you know, Wayne and Garth are wearing those jerseys out in the street. So 2010 comes along, and I actually moved to Chicago. I worked for the Chicago Fire of MLS for a season there. And at that time, the Sharks had been kind of letting me down in the playoffs. And I thought to myself, should I become a Blackhawks fan? Well, I'm glad that I didn't, because right after I get there, for the most part, the Blackhawks absolutely kick the out of the Sharks in the conference final and win the Stanley Cup. And that really upset me quite a bit, especially because I was like the only Sharks fan in that whole metro area of like 10 million people. So I said, no. I cannot cheer for this team at all. So I went like a decade of not liking the Blackhawks. And now, like, I'm pretty indifferent. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Blackhawks as well. That doesn't make things any easier for people who want to get into the team. That's all I'll say there. Next up, Tampa Bay Lightning. So the Lightning, 2004, they win the Stanley Cup over the Calgary Flames. And I, had an appreciation for them because the Flames had beaten the Sharks in the conference final. So I wanted Tampa to win, even though the Flames might have won Game 6, right? So with Tampa, I liked some of the players that were on that team, certainly Martin St. Louis and future San Jose Shark, Dan Boyle. A few years ago, this is 2018, I went to a game there, actually supporting Toronto because Marleau was on the team. And it was cool because, the whole arena was blue and white. You just couldn't tell who was cheering for whom. It was super lively. I had a great time interacting with the fans there. Of course, Tampa's won the past 2 Stanley Cups. I was never cheering for them during those runs, but I do admire the way that they assembled that team, and I am happy for the fans down there for sure. Of course, I don't want to see them repeat again, but I don't hate the team at all. Next up, we have the Kraken. Of course, they've just played their first season, and they are my local team. I'm a 5-hour drive from Seattle, and I went to a game this past November. Anyway, I haven't been following them as much as I thought I would. One reason is because obviously they haven't been as good, so they haven't been as relevant. It's more like a specialty team, like from a different league that goes up against the NHL occasionally. That's kind of what it feels like following them this year as an expansion team. But yeah, I'm sure a ton of people are just excited to have professional hockey in the area. And yeah, I'll be cheering for them to some degree for the most part, having grown up a Seattle Supersonics fan. But of course, I miss the Supes more than anything. But the Kraken, great look to them. And just a 5-hour drive away if I want to see them again. Now we get to the Arizona Coyotes. And as a kid, in 1997, I went to a game down there when they were the Phoenix Coyotes. And yeah, I loved the Kachina look back then. And then afterwards, they were actually a pretty good team. They were a real thorn in the side of my San Jose Sharks. So they were kind of like a bitter rival, but I didn't hate them like I did some other teams in that division. In fact, I do kind of like them as one of my favorite teams in the Western Conference. I want to see them succeed at some point. Obviously, they have a smaller fan base. They don't get nearly as much love out there. So I'm waiting for the day until they kind of come alive and bring back kind of the Coyotes of the early 2010s. Next up are the Vancouver Canucks. I was pretty indifferent toward the Canucks as a kid. And then flash forward to about 2007. They had rebranded in terms of not just the Orca from a couple previous years, but they also had the blue jerseys now with the green accents. I fell in love with them. So they kind of became my second favorite team for a little while there. My parents were in New York and they went to the NHL shop. This is when I'm in college. And they came back and they bought me this stick and rink beanie. And so I was like, hell yeah, this is great. So I thought that they were a team that I liked. Then 2011 happens, and man, they made a lot of haters out there that run. They were the best team in the Western Conference, and they pretty much just took a big dookie on my San Jose Sharks in the conference final there. I could not stand guys like Burrows and Bieksa was a guy I used to like, and I couldn't stand him. And there were a couple other players out there. Did Torres play for them back then? I can't quite remember. But anyway, I was very bitter toward the Canucks for a number of years, and since then I haven't really become a fan of them per se. Of course, there are a lot of Canucks content creators on YouTube. Love you guys, that's never going to change. But I think it's going to take a while until I can actually embrace the Canucks, so to say. Love that they brought back the skate jersey, but please make that the full-time home and away. Next up, we have this team here, the Dallas Stars. Now, I've never liked the Dallas Stars. I grew up hating the Dallas Cowboys, and that's never, ever going to change. And with the Stars, they were a huge rival of my San Jose Sharks back in the day. So, of course, that set the standard. In 2008, they met in the second round of the playoffs. The Stars had a 3-0 series lead. The Sharks win games 4 and 5. And then in game 6, it goes into 4 overtimes with some of the best goaltending I have ever seen from not only Yevgeny Nabokov, but also Marty Turco. And the Stars win that series. And man, if the Sharks won that game, they would have gone back to the tank for game 7. I think they would have won. But anyway, I never liked the Stars. That's basically it. I like that they, of course, went to the victory green. That's cool. They brought in Joe Pavelski. So I did cheer for Pavelski in the Stanley Cup final against Tampa a couple years ago. But even now, I don't find myself really supporting them. Next up, we have the New Jersey Devils, and this was a team that I found myself cheering for early on as a kid. I didn't really watch much NHL, but I would watch playoffs or the Stanley Cup Finals. So maybe in '95, I can't remember if I watched that against the Red Wings, but I think I cheered for New Jersey then. I cheered for them in 2000. They played the Dallas Stars. They won that. '03, I cheered for them against the Ducks. The Ducks had beaten the Wild. So anyway, I've cheered for New Jersey every time they've been in the Stanley Cup Final. And in 2012, of course, against the LA Kings, a bitter rival of my Sharks. So the Devils have always been kind of like a fallback team, but they've been irrelevant for, about 7 or 8 years now. So I haven't really been following them all that much. And I'm just kind of waiting for them to get over that hump so that they can become more relevant now. Next up, we have the Philadelphia Flyers. And I've never really been a Flyers fan or a Flyers hater by any means. Part of me has kind of wanted to like the Flyers for some reason. I don't know. It must be that logo. I absolutely love it. But in 2010, that was when I liked them the most. I remember watching them complete a reverse sweep against the Boston Bruins, who I'll talk about later on. And yeah, that was the time when I probably appreciated them most. But other than that, they've been kind of even keel for me. I've never really hated them. I've never really loved them either. And so, sorry, Flyers fans, I don't really have much more to say here. Now we have the Montreal Canadiens, and thinking back, I remember as a kid, I had kind of like a bubble hockey set, and the teams that they had were LA and Montreal because they had met in the Cup final in 1993. And so I was like, all right, well, I love this red and blue color scheme here, so I'd always play as Montreal. Years later, when I was really starting to follow the NHL, I just heard the media always drooling over the Habs and Carey Price and Pacioretty and whatnot. And I was like, man, I'm getting sick of this crap. Because when they'd get in the playoffs, especially as a higher seed, they would crash and burn most of the time, right? So I kind of would laugh at all the failures of the Canadiens, kind of like we do today for the Maple Leafs. I should have really talked about that as well. But I certainly was happy when in 2021, they went on that crazy run, especially because they beat Vegas in the conference final there. And so I don't hate the Canadiens by any means, but I think that there are some Canadian teams due for a Stanley Cup before it's the Habs. Now we have the Nashville Predators. This was a team that I initially liked quite a bit. I loved those initial jerseys. It just had kind of a motocross sort of vibe. And I was a big fan. And early on, they would always be an underdog and they'd get into the playoffs somehow. Barry Trotz was a huge reason why. I was a fan of Timonen on defense and also, of course, Tomáš Vokun and later on Pekka Rinne. So I liked them quite a bit. And then later on, when they got really, really good and they were kind of like a top seed, I started not liking them. I think it's because they kept beating the Sharks in the regular season, even though we are 3-0 against them in playoff series. And I know a lot of people out there kind of got turned off of the Predators because of, they would say, the fans or just, I don't know, the atmosphere or something like that. They would get annoyed by it. So I went to a game to see for myself a few years ago. Loved it. Had such a fun time. Not really a huge fan of the way that the team is constructed now, but as an underdog, I could see myself getting on board with them. Now here are a couple of teams that are pretty obscure to me historically. So first of all, Carolina Hurricanes. Initially, I didn't like the Hurricanes. I just thought that their logo looked like a disc. And so I rooted for them, or rooted against them, I should say, in 2002 against the Red Wings. And for a number of years there, I just really didn't really care about them. Although in 2006, I got to credit them for beating the Edmonton Oilers, who had knocked out my Sharks in the playoffs. So other than that, though, Carolina, I was just like, why are they even in the NHL? 2018 comes along, and previously they had changed their jerseys for the better, too. Those candy cane jerseys were blech. Anyway, so I liked the look that they were going for. They hire Rod Brindamore, who I knew was going to succeed with the team. Somehow I knew that. And anyway, I've really liked the way that they pieced together their roster over the years. They've been a team that I've liked to watch. I've been kind of gravitating more toward some southern states or kind of like non-traditional markets, Carolina being one of them. And yeah, maybe they could win the Stanley Cup this year. If not, they've got a couple of good years in the Cup contention window. And so I like them just fine right now. Now for the Columbus Blue Jackets, kind of another obscure team out there. Yeah, early on they had Rick Nash, and that was about it in terms of what was going for them. He scored some of the prettiest goals of that era for sure. But other than that, I didn't really care for the Jackets at all. They didn't have like any other big name players that I was into so much. No real connections to Columbus. Initially, too, I never liked those original logos at all. Eventually, they would change them, all for the better, of course. But even so, I've just never been attracted to them all that much. Except for the Cannon jersey, of course. When they unveiled that in 2010, I was like, all right, if I were to buy a jersey for a team I don't cheer for, that would be the one. Anyway, 2019 was, of course, magical for them as they upset the record-tying Tampa Bay Lightning for most points in a season, I believe. But even that, I don't know. Something's going to really have to convince me to become a Blue Jackets supporter. But I do want to go to a game because I got to see that cannon in action. Now we get to the Colorado Avalanche, and actually I kind of liked those guys early on. The logo back in the 1990s when that was actually trendy and fashionable, I thought that looked super sharp. Loved the jerseys too. And back then you had Patrick Roy, one of the greatest goaltenders of all time. So I kind of fell back on him as sort of my favorite goaltender back then, I would have to say. But yeah, I still found myself supporting them in the Stanley Cup in 1996 against the Panthers, and also 0-1 against the Devils. After that, they became kind of irrelevant for a number of years, during like the Matt Duchene era. So I never hated them, but I was like, man, this team doesn't really have much going for them. I don't really feel a need to cheer for them. But I've become quite a big Nathan MacKinnon fan, and just watching them, that brand of hockey that they play now, I like that quite a bit. So even though I'm not going to be cheering for them above some other teams to win the Stanley Cup this year, I wouldn't mind if they won this year or in the next couple of years, because again, just really fun to watch. Next up, we have the St. Louis Blues, another team with a good historic rivalry in the playoffs with my Sharks, but I never found myself hating the Blues. So the first time they met in the playoffs when I was watching was 2012, but the Blues were the better team going into that. Like the Sharks, that was kind of a lost season for them for whatever reason. Then 2016 comes along, the Sharks beat the Blues in the conference final. But 2019 is kind of interesting because I think for a lot of Sharks fans, that would kind of turn them off from the St. Louis Blues. But before that regular season started, I actually predicted the Blues to win the Stanley Cup. And so I kind of became a passive supporter of that team. So even though we lost to them, I was really happy when they raised the Stanley Cup. And, the first time they did that in their 52-year history at the time. Other than that, though, I don't really find myself as a Blues fan per se. I love those heritage jerseys, absolutely. But other than that, they're kind of just for me. Don't hate them, don't love them. Next up, we've got the Boston Bruins, and I've never really liked the Bruins, let me just be honest with you there, but I've been to a game at TD Garden, had a great time. This was back in 2015, but if anything, the reason why I would have hated the Bruins was because Brad Marchand, and I'm sure a lot of you out there would say similarly, and also Zdeno Chara. It's interesting because those guys are like a foot apart in height. With Chara, he has had a lot of dirty moments, let's be frank, but I do respect the way that he's grown his game over time. Marchand as well, for that matter, too. He was a dirty son of a bitch for a number of years, and even though he might throw the occasional ill-advised hit here and there, I have actually kind of found myself liking him to a degree. He's a personality that the NHL can definitely thrive on, so I do appreciate him from that standpoint. And the thing is, Boston, they win everything, right? Patriots won 6 Super Bowls, Red Sox have won a bunch of World Series, Celtics had a championship of their own in 2008. So I was like, no, the Bruins, they don't need to win any Stanley Cups or whatever. But I did appreciate in 2011 when they beat the Vancouver Canucks. I appreciated that quite a bit. So I won't forget you for that, Boston. Other than that, though, I don't really find myself a hater anymore. It's just kind of like the Penguins. I root for those two teams the least out of anybody in the Eastern Conference. And Tampa, you could put them in that group as well, pretty much. Now for the Detroit Red Wings, a team that as a kid, I liked a little bit. One reason was because I collected these little figurines called headliners. They were only about this tall. And of course, I had guys like Yzerman, I had Fedorov, I had Chelios, Lidstrom, maybe a goaltender or two. So I was cool with the Red Wings initially. And so I would root for them in the Stanley Cup in 97, 98, and 02. But my Sharks, shortly after that, they start to kind of rise in the Western Conference in relevancy. But the Red Wings were like the bigger brother. They would always beat us. And so I developed an animosity toward the Detroit Red Wings, especially in 2007. We lost to them in the playoffs. 2008, I rooted against them in the Stanley Cup. Let's flash forward to 2010. We met in the playoffs. And 2011, we met in the playoffs. So we became very familiar adversaries. And so when Detroit was good, I couldn't stand them. But there's been a number of years of hardship in Detroit. And I will really do say this, especially since they're not in the Western Conference anymore. I miss the hell out of that, by the way. The NHL is so much better when the Red Wings are a relevant team. So I'm really looking forward to what they can do with this young core coming together with Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, Simon Edvinsson, and a couple others in the mix there too. So anyway, Red Wings, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys can do. Who knows, maybe I'll cheer for you on a run or two. Next up is the New York Islanders, and I grew up on the West Coast, and so you don't really follow the Eastern teams quite as much. And I never really liked the Islanders that much. They just seem kind of superfluous, especially since there was the Rangers already. And I know I might get some hate, of course. I know Kim's watching. I didn't like the Islanders logo. I'm not a huge fan of it, although I understand why people like it. But anyway, the last few years though on YouTube, I've acquainted myself quite a bit with the Islanders fan base. And I love you guys. You are very passionate and fired up about this team, win or lose. So I really do like them quite a bit. Barry Trotz is my favorite head coach, one of my favorite personalities, non-player wise in the NHL. So yeah, I do see myself eventually supporting them on a couple of their runs. I've definitely rooted for them in series recently against like the Bruins, against the Lightning. So I have no animosity toward the Islanders. I never will. Now we get to the Vegas Golden Knights. I have a lot of Knights fans watching my videos. And don't worry, I won't rip into you guys too much. Actually, I was pretty fired up when Vegas got an NHL team awarded to them. I thought, hey, that's great. Like a new geography, a new market, right? This will be terrific for the NHL. So I was happy with that. Then they unveil their mascot, or not Chance, but their team name and their logo and jerseys and whatnot. And initially I was like, what the is this? The Golden Knights? That sounds so goddamn corny. Anyway, I came to really like their look. Yes, absolutely. But as early as like their third or fifth game, these guys started winning. And I was like, that's not supposed to happen. And they start beating the crap out of my San Jose Sharks. I'm like, what the is this? 2018 playoffs roll around and we lose to them in 6 games. And I was just really happy the Capitals won the Stanley Cup this year. That's one reason why you've got Ovechkin behind me here. Anyway, there will come a time when the animosity dies down. I love the fans that watch my videos, interacting with them. Everyone's really cool with each other. And so I want to keep it that way for sure. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens to this team. That's all I'm going to say. Now we get to the Florida Panthers, and a lot of you out there know that I do like the Florida Panthers quite a bit now. But back in the day, I didn't care for them whatsoever. I thought that I didn't like their look, actually. And I wasn't like a huge fan of any players in particular over there. So yeah, for a long time there, the Panthers were a team that, yeah, I wouldn't say I hated them by any means, but I didn't find myself cheering for them. But then flash forward to about 2018, I would say, and the rebrand. I liked the rebrand quite a lot, even though I also like the old look. I've come to appreciate that quite a bit. But yeah, I certainly became a fan of Evgeny Dodonov and also Jonathan Huberdeau. Even though Dodonov left, I found myself watching the Panthers because I liked the style of hockey that they played, especially without any serious investment in them, right? You don't care if they break down in the defensive zone and allow 5 goals, but they're the team that can come back and win 6-5. So that's why I've liked watching them over the years. Of course, they have Jumbo Joe Thornton right now, so please win the cup this year. Now we get to the Buffalo Sabres, and kind of going back to that 1997 Coyotes game that I went to. they played the Sabres back then. And so I was like, okay, I can like the Coyotes and I wouldn't like the Buffalo Sabres. Back then, I didn't even like the Goat Heads. So they were behind the 8 ball early on as a hockey fan. That changed over time with Ryan Miller and Maxim Afinogenov and a couple of the other players there as well, Brian Giunta being another one as well. And so I found myself actually liking the Sabres during the Buffalo Slug era. I actually really liked the Buffalo Slug back then. But over time, I became a supporter of the Sabres because I have a soft spot for Buffalo sports fans. See, as a Vikings fan for football, I can relate because we've lost all 4 Super Bowls we've appeared in. So I've kind of become a bit of a Buffalo Bills supporter on the side. And so therefore, I also kind of like the Sabres as well. And then looking back on their history with Rick Jeanneret, one of the greatest broadcasters of all time, and Dominik Hasek, the best goaltender to watch of all time without question. So I've certainly taken a liking to them. And I can't wait to see what they can do with Owen Power. And Alex Tuck is obviously making his mark on the franchise. So that's a great storyline in my opinion as well. And I love the royal and yellow jerseys. Those are just magnificent. Now we get to the LA Kings. Yeah, initially I didn't hate the Kings actually. And again, growing up in Northern California, you have to hate LA, especially the Dodgers and the Lakers. So the Kings were actually kind of crappy when I started really getting into the NHL. So I didn't hate them that much by any means. Then 2011 rolls around. They play the Sharks in the playoffs, and the Sharks win that. And around that time, that's when I start to kind of hate the Kings. 2012, yeah, they went on that miraculous run. And so I'm like, God, how did they win a Stanley Cup so easily when we've been building for the last couple of years to really, solidify ourselves as the favorite to win a Stanley Cup? 2013 rolls around, and the Sharks lose in the second round in the playoffs to them in 7 games. Great series, by the way. But yeah, the animosity is at its highest. Oh, also in 2013, Dustin Brown intentionally ends Tomas Hertl's season with a knee on knee. One of the dirtiest players of this era. I can't stand him on the ice. Anyway, 2014 rolls around, and of course, that's the reverse sweep. I can only blame the Sharks for that, but the Kings, of course, win the Stanley Cup on top of it. We get our revenge, sort of, in 2016, and then the Kings kind of take a nosedive from there. They make the playoffs in 2018, but they get swept by the Golden Knights in the first round. And then the Kings go into that, lull where they're completely irrelevant and now they're good. But during that time, I found myself kind of missing the Kings. It's really like the Joker in The Dark Knight when he says to Batman, "You complete me," right? They need each other. And so that's how I've always viewed the Kings, a necessary evil. I can't stand them, but if they suck, if they're irrelevant, it's just not as fun. So I love to hate them. That's kind of where I am. And between the two rivalries, between the Sharks rivalry with the Kings and the Sharks rivalry with the Knights, I will take the rivalry with the Kings any fucking day. Now we go to the Calgary Flames, and when I started really getting into hockey and the San Jose Sharks, the Calgary Flames that year in the conference final beat the Sharks. So I actually could not stand the Calgary Flames, and that continued for a number of years. We'd actually meet in the playoffs in 2008 in a great 7-game series. But even so, after beating them, my animosity was still kind of, simmering for a number of years. That died down eventually. And I do kind of like the Calgary Flames just fine. I do want to go to Calgary one day. So anyway, they're not a team that I actively cheer for, but I could see myself pulling for them if they can go on a run this year here. Now we've got the New York Rangers. This was a team that I initially liked quite a bit because I was a huge fan of the jerseys, the lettermark jerseys, the color scheme, the shield logo, even though they don't use that on the jersey. And so I like the New York Rangers, man. The Misfits, a band that I used to listen to a lot in high school, and I still do now, had a song called I Want to Be a New York Ranger. And so I was like, all right, man, the Misfits like this team, then I like them too. So I would always play as the Rangers in NHL 2K5 or 2K4. Or the Senators too. Those were the teams that I played as the most. And so I just found myself kind of liking the Rangers. And then, I rooted for them, of course, in 2014 against the Kings. I'm never going to be super high on them because, they are kind of in the spotlight in that tri-state area. So I don't want to overly favor them versus the Islanders or the Devils. But I am excited to see what they can do with this core that they've built. And the rebuild, I really do admire that they leaned right into that, and the results are certainly coming in. And then lastly, we do have my beloved San Jose Sharks. Now, there was a time when I did question my allegiance as a fan. This is when, They had been collapsing in the playoffs, especially against the Anaheim Ducks in 2009 because the Sharks won the President's Trophy then. And I was like, man, I can't deal with this torture, this torment. And I wanted to become a Blackhawks fan when I moved to Chicago. But this changed my mind. So I go to the leasing office when I'm, moving in, and they say, hey, by the way, you actually can paint 2 of your walls, any color you want. And I said, whoa, that's amazing. And I said, hey, could you paint one of those walls like a deep teal? And certainly that is exactly what we had done. So I said, you know what? I'm a California boy. I'm never going to leave my favorite team. And that kind of solidified it there. Although, one thing that really pissed me off was in 2013 when the Sharks traded for Rafi Torres. I could not stand that whatsoever. I had almost like a mild breakdown because of that. Because of how he had taken out Milan Mihalik and kind of put a real dent in his career, to be frank. So that was something that I could not get on board with whatsoever. Although I will say, Torres, for a little while there, actually played really, really well and was a great asset for the team. But then, of course, he goes off and does something stupid, and he takes out Jakob Silfverberg in a preseason game. He never plays a game in the NHL ever again. So anyway, those were the times when I was the most angry and upset as a Sharks fan, but I still love them through the thick and thin. It's a real freaking rough time right now, but I'm still following this team and producing some content around them. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a big thumbs up. Comment down below for me. Was there ever a time when you used to hate a team and now you actually kind of like them? Or vice versa. So comment down below, let me know, and stick around for more videos like this one. In the meantime, feel free to keep up with me on social media. See the video description down below for that. Also, there's a link to our merchandise store. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Nick. I'll catch you Twisters later. Ciao.